I know we didn't have a chance to talk much about it going into Monday because there was a huge game that night at Pinnacle Bank Arena. And knowing that very unfortunate loss that Nebraska hoops had to Penn State, what a great opportunity to bounce back. And if you would have told me that Nebraska was going to keep Michigan in the mud in the 40s, I would have said, oh my gosh, you're going to win. This is going to be one of those beautiful gems at Pinnacle Bank Arena where Nebraska just locks down and maybe they score 60 points. But if they hold Michigan to 40-something points, it's game on. This is exactly where Nebraska wants to be. Unfortunately, and this is a bit of a concern for me, is this offense, which I know is not overly gifted and a team that you can expect to be in the 80s every evening they go out there. There are limitations, but other than that Washington game where I think that was the last time I remember them playing 40 minutes of actual solid offense. We remember how Washington was scorching hot in the first half and Nebraska was holding steady there. Mm-hmm. Since then, they've had some decent halves in spurts offensively, but they have not had that 40-minute look like they did against Washington. And unfortunately here now the last couple of games, especially Michigan, which is a good team, obviously, but Penn State, that's been some woeful shooting. And I still believe this. I've said this for many, many years, is that if you are going to be an NCAA tournament team, you start to take on the look of that team right around this time, mid to late February. And if that's the case, boy, I'm worried about this offense.
Yeah, I mean, and the offense had been concerning even before that, right. You know, if you had – there were stretches where you didn't have Bryce Williams showing up. That hasn't been the case lately. He's scoring over 20 a game. You just didn't have anything from anyone else. And the concern becomes offensively what Michigan went to in the second half, what Dusty Mace talked about that they went to in the second half, where they just said, if there's ever a ball screen, and Nebraska loves its ball screens, that they were just going to hedge and double. And just say, if anyone else wants to try to make something, go right ahead. We'll live with it. And ultimately, nobody really did. I mean, I know Sam Hoiberg hit 2 threes. That was great, but nobody else effectively did anything. Hoiberg was your second leading scorer in that game because of 2 shots, and that's all it took. Bryce only made 2 shots in the second half. Only shot 4 free throws in the entire game. So there's a lot to look at offensively that needs to get fixed. Your number one shooter goes, 0 for 4 from deep. Berke has his return, and he goes 0 for 10 from the field. Somebody's got to do something. And that doesn't even count Braxton Mia and Andrew Morgan. You've got to get one of those guys has got to get to 6 to 8 points. That's not asking the world, right? No. Like, that's not saying you got to go get 15 to 20. I want 6 to 8 from you guys in there. And if combined you can get to 10, wonderful. Defensively, I don't have concerns. I know there are times that teams are just going to go nuclear from deep. That's just the way the defense is organized. But you're seeing some good defense be played, especially in the second half of these games. Can you get any offense to match it? And I don't know, but I hope with Minnesota, an Ohio State team you've seen once before already, and a home game with Iowa, who you've also seen once already, can get the offense a little bit back on track heading to Indianapolis.
Let me ask you this question, because it sounds kind of bizarre given the fact that we were really concerned that Buchtengel was out for the little stretch that he was, given where he was offensively before the ankle injury. The disjointed offense against Michigan, other than the obvious that Michigan is a very good team, the disjointed offense, though, I do wonder when you've all of a sudden forged a plan to play without a guy for, again, a short period of time, where you also have a guy like Berke who was starting to have an offensive impact a lot more consistently, that you then remove him from the equation, then you bring him back into the equation. And if that could have led to the offense just really being out of sorts, and that's not say, hey, it's Berkey's fault that he's back and now all of a sudden, you got to sit him back on the bench. But I do wonder if there was an adjustment period and that was just the wrong team, like a Michigan team. Again, I'm not trying to make excuses for Nebraska, but if that was the wrong team to have him back in the lineup and just try to figure your offense out again after, I think Nebraska, for at least as much as they could, as much as I think this team can, was figuring some pieces out without him. I really like the way Braxton Mia it really asserted himself offensively in the absence as well. I think that, and he got the start, but there's part of me that wonders if that was just the wrong matchup to have Berkey back and saying, okay, this is what we got to go back to doing again. I don't know. It's just a crazy theory. I'm curious what you think on that.
No, it's something good to bring up because we didn't delve too much into that on After Nebraska Ball, and maybe Jack and I will get into it with our Nebraska Ball brunch show tomorrow, which you can hear right here on the Husker Max YouTube page at 11 a.m., also over on the I-80 Club YouTube. I know with Berkey, he had just had his best offensive game. Before getting hurt. And he gets hurt late in that game. And then, yeah, you've gone through and tried to figure out who was going to do what in his absence. And really that became the combination of Braxton Mia and Andrew Morgan at the 5 spot. And then sliding guys all over with who's going to play the 4. And so it became a kind of mix and match. I think when you look at the 10 shots that Berkey took, and I'm talking specifically just the offensive end right now, I could probably see 3 or 4 that were really forced. There were also a couple of shots that I thought were really good, that I like him backing someone down on the baseline here and taking that kind of short corner turnaround, and he's made a number of those. There's something funky going on with his shot. He like double cocked it at one point, and there wasn't really a reason to at the end of the first half. I thought he had a wonderful look at the end of the game. Like when you talk about throwing the ball the length of the court and it ending up in one guy's hands who can hit threes. Like it didn't end up in Braxton Mia or Andrew Morgan's hands. And I know that's not who you're putting out on the floor in that situation, but for it to fall to him and him to have an open look, he leaned back a little bit, and that's why it was short. Like you can get into all of the mechanics on the shot mechanics, but that was a good shot. So he took 10 shots, but there were also a lot of guys that were forcing stuff, and you shot 25% for the game. So I don't think offensively it was necessarily Berkey causing some things to be disjointed. What I think Berkey's contribution was, where I think it was biggest and most necessary, was on the defensive end and rebounding. You didn't get destroyed on the rebounds.
No, they didn't. Not at all.
Because you were able to have a combination out there at times of Berkey and Braxton or Berkey and Andrew, and sometimes Berkey at the 5, and then you're figuring out who's guarding one of the 7-footers for Michigan. But him coming back helped that out in a way that you missed over the previous couple of games because you needed him defensively. He ended up with, did he get 2 blocks? Yeah, he had 2 block shots. One of them just destroyed a guy right at the rim. Like him defensively was a really big help for this team. And he ends up with 4 rebounds. But one of the things I talked with Jack about, because Juwan Gary had like 3 rebounds over the previous 2 or 3 games. And I said the reason for that is he has to go be the guy getting a body on a big man. And instead of Berkey, which frees Juwan to go kind of like be athletic. You're 6'6". You're not going to go just jump somebody straight up. But if you can get lateral and just get going and be athletic, that's what Juwan Gary does. And what happens is Juwan ends up with 6 rebounds this game. Like that, those are the types of things that there's little differences that I think overall it was a positive to have Berkey back in the game because of what he brought defensively and rebounding. But man, if something offensively, if he hits 1 shot.
Yeah, exactly.
Not even just that one at the end, but if he hits 1 shot leading into that, like it's a different last minute the way it all plays out.
Yeah, and that's why I bring up the offense looking disjointed. And I don't want to make it come across as I'm saying, boy, Fred should have waited another game to bring Berkey back. No, absolutely. And I think you bring up a lot of good points on what he brought to the table, because the amount of misses in that game, Nebraska could have got completely run off the boards, and they were very competitive in that category. So there were the 12 offensive rebounds, which that was a problem, but still both teams just building absolute houses with the bricks. And so it was great to see Berke having that. And I think it's a great point. It's a very astute point on Juwan Gary being able to size up with somebody a little bit more within his range, that he's going to be effective on the glass. I think about this. If you could have had, say, that Penn State game where Berke's back, I think there's more offensive involvement with him, or I think he's more effective offensively. Mm-hmm. I think it was a bad luck of the draw, because what are you going to do if you're Fred Hoiberg? If he's ready to play, you're going to play him. It's not like you're like, well, this isn't the team we want to do that. It was hard for me to get past the fact that if they're playing anybody but Michigan, that this would have been a little bit more, I think, of even with some clunkiness offensively, that you could survive with that. And here's the other part. When you're shooting 20%, and this goes back to something you bring up, Nebraska, we know, will have certain limitations offensively compared to certain teams that they're going to play in the Big Ten, and that is just a fact. That's their identity. They can defend at a high level, and that's what they're going to make their hay on. But if you could just shoot in the low 30s, you win that game. So please tell me, can they shoot in the low 30s? Because then they could beat Michigan.
They win by 10.
I know. It's probably a blowout. Although I'm sure Dusty May is saying the same thing, that if we could shoot just in the upper 30s, we would have won that game by about 15. So
because you look at it, and because it was only a free throw contest for like 2 trips.
Yeah.
And which was amazing at the end, because you had Michigan made their 2, Bryce made his 2, and then it was a front end miss for Michigan, and then you had the Connor Essegian shot that didn't go, and then 2 more free throws for Michigan. That was it. Mm-hmm. As opposed to sometimes where you're like, this was 16 free throws in the last minute and a half. Yeah. You didn't get that. So you end up with Michigan going 8 for 13, Nebraska going 8 for 12. It was a wash when you look at the potential of where you get into the Knights of Columbus free throw, or the Elks free throw, whichever one of those fraternities it is. Shout out to that. That was always fun growing up, going to Ord to take on whatever our region or district was. But for Nebraska now, you've got 3 games left. A lot of the bracketology I've seen still says get to 19 and you're in. 19 in the regular season before you get to Indianapolis. So that's Minnesota this Saturday. That is Ohio State this next week at Ohio State. And then closing out home with Iowa the next Sunday, so coming around in like 10 days. According to ESPN, Joe Lunardi, this as of 2 days ago, so maybe some teams have shifted around. Nebraska, one of the last 4 in, which would send them to Dayton to play Oklahoma.
How about that?
That would be interesting on that 11 line for the Big Red. I'm also one of the people saying in the hypothetical scenario, you absolutely count that as your first tournament win.
Yes, I'm 100%. It's the NCAA tournament.
If it counts for Indiana and everyone else, it counts for Nebraska. I don't care what Creighton people would say about Nebraska's first tournament win coming in Dayton. You would still get it. And also the teams in those first 4, there's always one of them that makes a run to the Sweet 16 or the Elite 8.
Yep.
So, like, it's not the worst thing in the world to get in there and not be matched up with a 5 seed or something like that. On the women's side, Nick, it was a really bad third quarter against Washington on Sunday. Alexis Markowski goes out a couple minutes in, and it was a really tight game up to that point. Kind of tweaks something in her back and is slow to get off the floor, goes immediately out the tunnel. She does come back a couple minutes later, but the run had started for the Huskies, who closed the third quarter on a 15-0 run. And it was just all kind of over from there. Both teams score over 20 in the fourth quarter, but the deficit's too big for the Huskers on senior day. Alexis Markowski does grab another double-double. I believe she's at 51 for her career, which is insane. There's going to be plenty of time to talk about what her legacy is with this basketball program, because she has been a stalwart for the last 4 years, and it's going to be weird to watch a team next year not have Markowski coming out with the starting lineup. Yeah. But there's one game left in the regular season. That is on Sunday against Northwestern, who just had to forfeit their 2 games from their LA trip because they didn't want to travel to Los Angeles, because there were wildfires across the city and the region that caused cancellations in the NBA, in in every sport that was down there were cancellations or postponements, but the Big Ten says Northwestern needs to forfeit those games. For Nebraska on the bubble, that's still where they're sitting as one of the last 4 byes, and this was as of 2 days ago. So this is including that weekend game. So Nebraska's sitting not headed to those first 4 locations, but actually right now on the 10 line would be taking on Oklahoma State in Baton Rouge, according to the women's bracketology on ESPN.
This is, at least from the men's standpoint, although they're running out of some runway to get to that number 19, which I'm with you. I think if they're there in the regular season, that's where they need to be. The women, they've got 1 left. And the good news is it's one of the worst teams in the Big Ten in Northwestern.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, well, then how do you approach that from what we do? I guarantee you, at least I hope the team is not looking at it this way. But there is nothing good that comes out of this win other than having to win and then you stay the course. Because the way that I look at Nebraska right now, they win this game and then you win one in the Big Ten tournament, I think you're locked in. Mm-hmm. I truly feel you're locked in. You lose this game, we've got problems because
you're sweating it out.
Absolutely, because these are those types of games. This is why that Penn State loss for the Nebraska men, we talked about Northwestern in that Penn State stretch that you weren't going to gain anything. It wasn't like all of a sudden Nebraska was going to start shooting up to an 8 or 7 seed. But what could impact you is if you lost one or both of those games, boy, it shoots you right down because that there's no quality impact that is going to come with a victory like that. It's only going to hurt you. So that's what Nebraska's up against with Northwestern. And the reason I say that, you bring up the Alexis Markowski where she gets banged up. We already know what this team has dealt with when it comes to injuries with Potts and Widener. And all of a sudden,
and Prince right now.
Yeah, exactly. Prince. I mean, that's another good one too. I know it sounds like she should be good to go, but let's hope that is progressing to that. I wouldn't, whenever we see her at full capacity, I still don't think she's going to be 100%. So then you're looking at, I mean, your catalyst, you're the heartbeat of your team in Alexis Markowski. Not sure how she's feeling right now, but if there's just, I've always felt this way for the Amy Williams squad this year, and kudos to Amy Williams and her coaching staff because they have squeezed everything out of this team despite those types of injuries. You get to a certain point where a team has horrific injury luck, and Nebraska is starting to teeter close to that, where you just get to a point where you have too many of them. And even the teams like Northwestern can sneak up and get you because you are just so badly beaten up. The health of this team, more than anything, concerns me. I still think with what they have and pieced together, they should be able to go out to Evanston and beat Northwestern. They do that, you're feeling pretty good. But I still think you got to get that one win in the Big Ten tournament to where you say, all right, we're good, we're in. Now let's just see where we fall from, into the seeding line. Let's see what that looks like. So don't overlook, and I'm not saying you are, but for fans, don't overlook it given the health status of this team into a team like Northwestern that knows, hey, this is it for us. So it's going to be essentially their national championship type game. You're going to throw everything at a team that is somewhat wounded right now. So those ones are always a little uncomfortable to experience, in my opinion.
In Nebraska right now, sitting on the 11 line for the Big Ten tournament, which would have them playing on the first day next week, which is Tuesday.
Yes, good and bad on that, Kaleb, because you'd love to avoid that first day, but the first day, in my opinion, especially for a team like Nebraska, gives you your best shot at getting a win too.
Yeah, if it comes down to just go get a win.
Yeah.
Win on Sunday and it just the chips fall and you're playing on that first day. Yeah, go blow somebody out right away and stack that up. We'll transition from there because there will be a lot more to talk about with basketball over the next couple of weeks.